Hello, I am Dean Miller, 35 years old, a tech millionaire with a fortune that sometimes even I find hard to believe. Approximately $400 million according to the latest valuation of my company. I live in Seattle where the drizzle seems never-ending, where neon-lit streets and the scent of coffee linger in the air. My home sits on a hill overlooking Puget Sound, a modern glass and steel mansion where every morning I wake up beside Elena, the wife I love more than life itself, and Mason, our 6-month-old son, a little bundle of joy with eyes as bright as a summer sky. But life, despite its glamorous facade, is never as simple as the photos on Instagram. Money, fame, extravagant wine-soaked parties, they're just a fragile veneer covering the deep cracks in my heart. And those cracks, they stem from family, more precisely from my parents, Arthur Miller and Carol Miller. I grew up in a small town a few hours' drive from Seattle, where endless fields of grass stretched under a gray sky that seemed to swallow all hope. My parents were not warm people. My father, Arthur, was a car mechanic with rough hands and an unpredictable temper. He often growled, shouted, and more than once his slaps left marks on my cheeks for spilling a glass of water or forgetting my homework. My mother, Carol, was different. She didn't hit me, but her eyes, cold and sharp as a blade, always made me feel like I was an unforgivable mistake. They weren't poor, but they weren't well off either. Our life was a cycle of tension and endless arguments. When I was 15, I decided I had to escape that place. I didn't want to become another version of my father, a bitter man resenting life, or my mother, a woman constantly complaining about what she didn't have. I studied day and night, earned a scholarship, and eventually set foot at MIT. There I discovered my passion for technology, for lines of code that could turn ideas into reality. At 25, I founded my first startup. At 30, I sold it for $200 million. By 35, my second company, an artificial intelligence platform, was valued in the billions. I became one of America's youngest millionaires, featured in Forbes, invited to tech summits, and living in a house I once thought existed only in dreams. But money doesn't buy everything. It doesn't erase the memories of nights spent hiding in a corner of my room listening to my parents scream. It doesn't heal the wounds in my heart when I think about how they treated me. And most importantly, it doesn't turn my parents into the kind of mother and father I once longed for. When I first started making money, I thought I could fix everything. I hired people to renovate my parents' old house, making it more spacious and cozy. I bought them a beachfront villa worth over $10 million, a retreat with lush gardens, an infinity pool overlooking the deep blue ocean, breathtakingly beautiful. I gifted them a luxury SUV, the kind of car my father had always dreamed of. I covered all their living expenses, utilities, health insurance, even the lavish vacations my mother bragged about around town. Every month I sent them $10,000 for pocket money, an amount I believed was enough for them to live comfortably, even extravagantly. But what I didn't expect was how deep human greed could run. Every time I called, my mother would complain about something they needed. A bigger TV, a trip to Hawaii, a sum of money to invest in my father's vague business ideas. I tried to meet their demands not because I wanted to show off, but because I thought it was a way to make up for leaving them behind, to ease the guilt of succeeding while they remained stuck in a mediocre life. But the more I gave, the more they demanded. My mother's calls began to carry a sickeningly sweet tone, filled with hollow compliments about my wonderful son. My father would pat my shoulder, call me the pride of the family, but his eyes looked at me like I was a walking safe. Elena saw it before I did. With her soft brown hair and sharp eyes, she always had a knack for seeing through people. "Dean," she said one evening as we sat by the fireplace, "I don't think your parents love you because you're their son. I think they love you for your wallet." I brushed off her words, laughing as if it were a joke, but deep down, I knew she was right. I just didn't want to face that truth. Elena is the guiding light in my life. We met 7 years ago at a tech conference in San Francisco. She was a freelance journalist writing about the impact of artificial intelligence on society. I was captivated by the way she asked questions, not the flattering kind meant to curry favor, but sharp, intelligent, as if she wanted to peel back every layer of my facade. I invited her for coffee after the panel, and from then on we were inseparable. When Mason was born, I felt my life was complete. That tiny boy with his chubby hands gripping my finger was everything I'd ever dreamed of. Looking at Mason, I vowed he would never grow up in the fear or loneliness I had known. Elena and I spent every spare moment with him, from sleepless nights changing diapers to mornings watching him giggle in his crib. Our house, though vast and modern, became warm with Mason's cries and laughter. But happiness, I've come to realize, is like a candle burning in the wind. It's beautiful but fragile, and that wind I never expected would come from the very people I called my parents. That Thanksgiving, we decided to visit my parents in the old town. I wasn't thrilled about it, but Elena convinced me. They're family, Dean. No matter what, they're your parents, and Mason should meet his grandparents. I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. I didn't want Mason to grow up not knowing his grandparents, but the thought of facing my parents made me feel like that 10-year-old boy again, cowering in a corner. The trip was meticulously planned. We drove over 3 hours, bringing a suitcase full of toys and diapers for Mason. My parents' house, where I grew up, had been renovated with my money. It was no longer the rickety wooden house with moss-covered shingles, but a bright 2-story home with new furniture and a garden my mother boasted was her masterpiece. Yet stepping inside, I still felt the familiar chill, as if the walls held memories of those old days. My mother hugged me too tightly, too long, with a smile so radiant I wasn't sure if it was genuine. "Dean, my boy, look at you, so successful and still remembering your parents." My father clapped my shoulder hard enough to make me stumble. "Good job, son. I'm proud of you." I gave a forced smile, exchanging a glance with Elena. She shook her head slightly as if to say, "Stay calm, it'll be fine." Mason, cradled in Elena's arms, yawned and squirmed. My mother practically snatched him from Elena, cooing words of affection I'd never heard her say to me. "Oh, my sweet grandson, so adorable. Look at that nose, just like his father's." Elena smiled politely, but I noticed her hands tighten around her purse. She was uncomfortable, and so was I. That evening we had dinner together. My mother made a traditional stuffed turkey, boasting she'd been preparing since morning. My father opened a bottle of wine I'd brought, endlessly talking about his new investment projects. "Dean, you know, if you lent me some money, I could open a bigger auto shop. This town needs one." I nodded, promising to consider it, but all I wanted was for the dinner to end. That night, as Elena and I lay in the old guest room bed with Mason sleeping soundly in his crib nearby, I couldn't sleep. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. Was it the way my mother looked at Mason with eyes both loving and something else? Or the way my father kept asking about my company, my wealth, my future plans? I shook my head, telling myself I was overthinking. They were my parents. They weren't perfect, but they were family. And family doesn't hurt each other, right? I was wrong, so terribly wrong. I didn't know that just hours later my world would collapse. I didn't know that the candle of my happiness was about to be snuffed out, and the ones I called my parents would be the wind that extinguished it. The next morning, my wife and I woke up to breathe in the fresh air of the suburbs. As I went downstairs, I saw my mother bustling in the kitchen, preparing special dishes for lunch. My father was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper, and upon seeing me, he rushed over to pull me out to the backyard to show off his gardening project. In reality, just a few stunted chrysanthemum beds. Elena was still upstairs feeding Mason and playing with him. I heard her laughter and Mason's happy gurgles, and for a moment it felt like all my worries melted away. But that feeling didn't last. As lunchtime approached, my mother suggested we go out to buy some kitchen supplies at a convenience store 15 minutes away by car. "You two go ahead. Leave Mason with me," she said in a sweet tone, but something in her eyes made me uneasy. Elena glanced at me, her eyes flickering with hesitation. "Are you sure, Mom?" she asked. "Mason's only 6 months old. He can be fussy." "Oh, don't worry." My mother waved her hand, laughing loudly. "I raised Dean, didn't I? Looking after a baby is no trouble. Go on, you two need some alone time." My father nodded in agreement, clapping my shoulder again. "Listen to your mother, Dean. She's got this." I looked at Elena, trying to read her thoughts. She gave a slight nod, though I noticed her hand gripping her purse tightly. "All right," she said. "But please, Mom, don't let Mason play with small toys. Yesterday I saw you holding that plastic ring with tiny beads. It's dangerous. Mason puts everything in his mouth." My mother laughed, waving it off as if it were trivial. "Don't worry, Elena. I know. I'll only let him play with safe toys." I saw Elena hesitate, but she eventually nodded, placing Mason in his crib and kissing his forehead. "Mommy will be back soon, my love," she whispered. We left the house and drove to the convenience store in the town center. I tried to enjoy the rare moment alone with my wife, but my mind kept drifting to Mason. "Are you okay?" I asked. She sipped her coffee, her gaze distant. "I don't know, Dean. Your mom. I'm not sure she's as careful as she claims. I just have a bad feeling." "You're worrying too much," I said, though I didn't fully believe my own words. "Mom's not perfect, but she wouldn't let anything happen to Mason. He's her grandson." Elena nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. She stared out the window, absently twisting her coffee cup in her hands. About 30 minutes later, after we'd bought everything my mother needed and were preparing to head back, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I smiled, thinking she was calling to gush about how cute Mason was. But when I answered, her voice came through, trembling and panicked. "Dean, you need to come back now. Mason, he's not breathing." My heart stopped. I heard Elena gasp, her coffee cup slipping from her hand and splashing across the floor. "What did you say?" I shouted into the phone, my voice breaking. "What's wrong with Mason? What are you talking about?" "Come back now," my mother screamed, then hung up. I don't clearly remember what happened next, how I ran to the car. All I recall is Elena crying, gripping my hand tightly, her voice shaking. "Dean, drive, hurry!" The drive back felt endless, though it took only 15 minutes. I floored the gas, speeding past every limit, my mind blank except for the image of Mason, my tiny boy with a smile that melted everything. No, it couldn't be. I couldn't finish the thought. When we burst into the house, my mother was standing in the living room, her face ashen, clutching her chest. My father stood beside her, his eyes wild with panic. "Dean, Elena, I don't know what happened," my mother stammered, tears streaming down her face. "I only left the room for a moment, and when I came back, Mason was—" I didn't hear the rest. I rushed to the crib where Mason lay motionless. My little boy, eyes closed, skin pale and bluish. I touched him, hoping to feel warmth, but his body was cold. "Mason!" I screamed, my voice breaking. Elena collapsed beside me, cradling Mason, sobbing uncontrollably. "My baby, Mommy's here. Open your eyes, please." I don't know how long I shouted, how long I held Mason and my wife in my arms. All I know is that when the police and ambulance arrived, they had to pull me away from him. A female paramedic with her hair tied high knelt beside the crib, starting chest compressions and administering oxygen. Her movements were swift, but I saw the look she exchanged with her colleague, a look that held no promise of hope. Elena clung to me, her nails digging into my arm as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "They'll save him, right?" she whispered, but her voice faltered as if she already knew the answer. I didn't respond, just held her tightly, my eyes fixed on Mason. After what felt like an eternity but was only minutes, the paramedic looked up, shaking her head slightly. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice low. "The child has no signs of life. We did everything we could." Elena let out a heart-wrenching scream and collapsed to the floor. I knelt beside her, holding her, feeling like the world was crumbling. Mason, my light, my joy, was gone. I looked at him lying there, still, his skin cold, and my heart felt like it was being crushed. My mother stood in the corner, hands covering her face, sobbing. "Dean, I don't know what happened," she repeated, her voice trembling. My father stood beside her, pale, muttering, "How did this happen? How?" Two police officers sprang into action immediately. One, a tall man with a deep voice, introduced himself as Officer Harris. He asked us to step back to preserve the scene. "I know this is a difficult time," he said, his eyes full of empathy but professional. "But we need to understand what happened. Who found the child?" My mother spoke up, her voice choked. I was watching him. I only left the room for a moment to get water, and when I came back, Mason wasn't breathing. I tried to shake him, but..." She trailed off, sobbing. I stared at her, searching for truth in her eyes, but saw only tears and panic. Or was I missing something? Officer Harris jotted notes quickly while the second officer, a young woman, began photographing the scene. She carefully inspected the crib and picked up a small piece of plastic, a part of the toy Elena had warned my mother not to let Mason play with. "We found this in the crib," she said, placing the fragment in an evidence bag. "This could be the cause. Choking hazard." Elena, still trembling in my arms, suddenly looked up. "I told her that toy was dangerous," she said, her voice icy despite her tears. "I specifically warned her not to let it near Mason." Officer Harris glanced at her, making another note, but said nothing. The air grew tense, as if everyone was holding back something. After the paramedics left, Mason's body was taken to the coroner's office for an autopsy. Officer Harris explained it was standard procedure for any unexplained infant death. "We need to determine the exact cause," he said. "It's likely a choking incident, but we have to be certain. You'll be informed of the results as soon as possible." The police stayed another hour inspecting the house, questioning us and my parents. They asked my mother what she'd done before finding Mason unresponsive, asked Elena and me about his habits, the toy, any relevant details. I answered mechanically, my mind numb, wanting only to hold Mason again. Elena was different. She answered clearly, but I saw her eyes dart to my mother, sharp as a blade. That night, Elena and I didn't sleep. We sat in the living room beside Mason's empty crib, silent. The pain was a monster gnawing at my heart, bite by bite. Elena leaned against my shoulder, her body rigid as if battling an inner storm. My mother tried to comfort us, hugging Elena and repeating apologies, but I noticed Elena pull away from her embrace, her eyes filled with suspicion. The next morning, as we packed to leave the town, Elena pulled me to the backyard where no one could hear. Her eyes were red, but her voice was firm. "Dean, I don't believe this was an accident," she whispered. "Your mother knew that toy was dangerous. I warned her, but she still left it in the crib. Don't you find that strange?" I looked at her, wanting to argue, to say her grief was clouding her judgment. But something in her voice, her eyes, stopped me. I glanced at the house, where my mother was washing dishes, looking distraught, and my father sat at the table, silently flipping through the newspaper. They looked like grieving grandparents. But my mother's eyes, when she briefly glanced at me through the window, felt off. Cold, as if she were wearing a mask. I took Elena's hand, squeezing it tightly, a spark of doubt igniting in my chest. "If you're right," I said, my voice trembling, "I swear we'll find the truth. For Mason." 5 days later, the autopsy results arrived. I received a call from the coroner's office on a rainy morning while sitting in my study staring at a family photo on my desk. The coroner's voice was cold and procedural. "Mr. Miller, the cause of Mason's death has been determined as asphyxiation due to choking on a small plastic object from a toy. There were no other abnormal injuries. We've concluded it was an accident." I hung up, feeling as though someone had punched me in the chest. An accident. The word echoed, sharp and meaningless. I wanted to believe it was true, that no one had intentionally harmed my son. But Elena's words from that day about my mother deliberately leaving the dangerous toy in the crib clung to my mind like a thorn. I stared out the window where rain pattered against the glass and wondered, Was my grief clouding my judgment, or was something truly wrong? Mason's funeral took place on a gray, dreary day, as if the sky itself were weeping with us. The cemetery was on the outskirts of Seattle, where rows of birch trees stood silently, their leaves falling onto the damp ground. Elena wore a simple black dress, her swollen eyes hidden behind sunglasses. She gripped my hand tightly, her body trembling as if she were fighting not to collapse. I wasn't faring much better. Standing before the tiny coffin, I couldn't believe that my boy, my joy, was now reduced to a name etched on a headstone. My parents were there, standing a few steps away. My mother sobbed loudly, drawing the attention of those around us. My father was silent, head bowed, hands in his pockets. I wanted to feel their pain, to believe they were as shattered as we were by the loss of their grandson. But every time I looked at my mother, I caught her eyes darting toward us, not with grief, but as if she were observing, assessing. Elena said nothing, but I knew she felt it too. As the priest read the final prayer, Elena squeezed my hand and whispered, "Dean, I want to go home." We returned to our hilltop mansion, but it was no longer a home. Gone were Mason's laughter and Elena's lullabies. Only a heavy silence remained, like a lead blanket pressing on my chest. Every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to picture Mason's face, but all I could see was him lying motionless in his crib, eyes closed forever. A few weeks after the funeral, with the pain still raw, my parents unexpectedly showed up at our door. My mother hugged me, tears streaming down her face, her voice choked. "Dean, my boy, your father and I can't bear the thought of you and Elena suffering alone. We're family. Let us stay with you for a while to help you both through this." My father nodded, clapping my shoulder as always, but this time I noticed his hand trembling slightly. "That's right, son. We want to be here for you." Elena stood behind me, silent. I looked to her, searching for agreement in her eyes, but she only gave a slight nod, her lips pressed tightly together. I knew she didn't want them here, but I didn't have the strength to refuse. The grief of losing Mason had drained me, and a part of me, the weak part, the part still yearning for a family, hoped their presence might fill the void. They moved in, bringing a few suitcases of clothes and endless words of comfort. My mother cooked every day. My father tinkered around the house, fixing things that didn't need fixing, like the kitchen cabinet door or a light bulb in the garage. At first, I thought they genuinely wanted to help. But within days, I began noticing strange signs. Elena was the first to sense something was off. One morning, as we sat at breakfast, she pushed her plate of scrambled eggs away, grimacing. "Dean, I feel so tired. My head's buzzing like I haven't slept enough." I nodded because I felt it too. I tossed and turned every night, even with sleeping pills. My vision blurred, my body felt heavy, as if a dark cloud followed me. "It's probably work stress," I said, trying to convince myself. "And Mason's loss." But Elena didn't agree. "No, Dean, this isn't normal. I've never felt like this before, don't you see? Ever since your parents arrived, we've been getting worse." She spoke softly, glancing toward the kitchen where my mother was washing dishes, humming an old song. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't deny that my health was deteriorating too. The dizziness, the waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. It all started when my parents moved in. I tried to dismiss the suspicion. They were my parents. They'd lost their grandson. They were trying to help. But then a memory flickered, a detail I'd overlooked. A few days earlier, I'd overheard my mother on the phone in the living room, her voice low and urgent. I know, but we need more time. I'll handle it." When I walked in, she quickly hung up, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Just an old friend, dear," she said, but her eyes avoided mine. Doubt began to gnaw at me, but I wasn't ready to face it. Not until one morning when everything changed forever. We were driving to an appointment with a therapist, a desperate attempt to cope with Mason's loss. Elena sat beside me, silent, her hands clasped tightly. The winding mountain road stretched ahead, with steep cliffs on one side and lush pine forests on the other. I was telling her about a new project at work, trying to lighten the mood, when suddenly the car jolted. The brakes failed. I pressed the pedal hard, but it went soft, useless. "Dean!" Elena screamed, grabbing the door handle. I swerved the steering wheel, trying to keep the car on the road, but it careened toward the edge at terrifying speed. The screech of metal rang out as we hit the guardrail, the car flipping onto its side. My head slammed against the window, pain shooting through me. Elena screamed, then everything went dark. When I came to, I was lying on a stretcher, the flashing lights of an ambulance cutting through the rain. Elena sat beside me, her head bandaged, her face covered in scratches. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, though my left leg throbbed as if it were broken. Later, doctors confirmed I had a fractured femur, while Elena had a mild concussion and some superficial wounds. We were lucky to survive, but as I lay in the hospital bed looking at Elena's pale face, I knew this was no random accident. The days that followed were an endless string of pain and suspicion. I was discharged from the hospital with a crutch and a long list of painkillers. Elena, despite her lingering headaches from the concussion, insisted on caring for me. But both of us knew that our physical wounds weren't the worst of it. The suspicion about my parents, people I once thought, despite their flaws, were still family, was eating away at us every minute. My parents remained in our home, continuing their act of a loving family. My mother prepared lavish meals, constantly asking about my and Elena's health, while my father lingered in the garage, claiming he wanted to check the replacement car provided by the insurance company after the accident. "Let me handle it, son," he said, patting my shoulder with a smile I no longer trusted. "You rest." But I couldn't rest. Every time I looked into my mother's eyes, I saw that cold gaze, one I'd once convinced myself was just my imagination. Every time my father patted my shoulder, it felt like he was sizing me up, like I was prey being hunted. And our health, Elena's and mine, kept deteriorating. The dizziness, insomnia, and inexplicable fatigue persisted. I began to wonder, was this really just stress or something far worse? Suspicion was no longer a small thorn, it was a blazing fire in my chest. I started noticing every detail. The way my mother insisted on cooking for us, the way my father frequently went to the garage to check something. I thought back to the accident, the brakes failing, the steering wheel shaking, and a horrifying possibility flashed in my mind. Had my father tampered with my car? The opportunity came one evening when I struck up a conversation with our neighbor, Mr. John. He was an elderly man living alone with a state-of-the-art security camera system surrounding his house. "Dean, I heard about the accident," he said, his voice full of concern. "Are you and Elena okay? You're lucky to be alive." I nodded, forcing a weak smile. "Thanks, John, just bad luck, I guess." Then I remembered his cameras pointed directly at our garage. "Hey, John," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Did your cameras catch anything the night before the accident? I mean, around our garage?" John raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "Let me check." I hobbled after him, each step with the crutch a challenge, but the adrenaline coursing through me dulled the pain. In John's small living room, we reviewed the security footage. The images were clear. My father opening the hood of my car, leaning over it for over 20 minutes, then walking away as if nothing had happened. My blood rushed to my head, my heart pounding. "Can you send me this video?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Of course, Dean," John said, his eyes filled with worry. "You okay? Is something wrong?" I shook my head, not wanting to drag him into this dangerous web. "Just need to check some things." "Thanks, John." Back home, I didn't tell Elena right away. I needed time to process what I'd seen. But the suspicion had now hardened into an undeniable truth. My father had tampered with the car. And if Elena was right, if my mother had deliberately placed that toy in Mason's crib, then we were living with monsters. I decided to act quietly. Using security software from my company, I installed hidden cameras in the house, in the kitchen, living room, and garage. I shared the plan with Elena one night after my parents had gone to bed. "We need proof," I whispered. "If they're really trying to hurt us, I won't let them get away with it." Elena nodded, her eyes resolute. "But we have to be careful, Dean. If they suspect anything, I don't know what they'll do next." A few days later, the cameras captured something that sent chills down my spine. In the kitchen, as my mother prepared dinner, she pulled a small, unlabeled glass jar from her apron pocket. She glanced around to ensure no one was watching, then sprinkled a pinch of seasoning from the jar onto mine and Elena's plates. Her movements were quick, practiced, as if she'd done this many times before. My throat went dry. The dizziness, insomnia, fatigue, it all made sense. I turned to Elena, who was watching the footage with me on the laptop. "They're poisoning us," I said, my voice breaking. Elena covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Dean, what do we do now?" I didn't answer right away. All I knew was that the seasoning jar was the key. The next day, while my parents were out, I retrieved the glass jar from the kitchen cabinet, carefully extracted a small sample of the powder inside, and took it to a private lab I knew through my company. "Test this," I told the lab manager, "and do it as fast as possible." The results came back 3 days later, confirming my worst fears. The substance in the jar was a slow accumulating poison that caused liver and neurological damage with prolonged exposure. It was nearly undetectable without specialized testing. I sat in my office staring at the report, feeling like the world was collapsing again. My parents, the people who raised me, had not only deliberately killed my son, but were now trying to kill Elena and me. For money, for their bottomless greed. I clutched the paper, my heart aching, but a fire of determination blazed within me. "They'll pay," I whispered to myself. "For Mason, for everything." The lab report lay on my desk like a silent indictment. The hidden camera footage from the kitchen showing my mother furtively sprinkling poison, the video from John's security system capturing my father tampering with our car before the accident, and the death of my son on that Thanksgiving at my parents' house. All were pieces of a horrifying truth. My parents, the people I once called family, had killed my son and were now trying to kill Elena and me. For money. For their insatiable greed, I sat in my office, staring at the evidence before me, feeling as if my heart were being crushed. Elena stood beside me, her hands trembling but her eyes resolute. "Dean, we can't wait any longer," she said, her voice low but firm. "We have to confront them for Mason." I nodded, though every breath felt painful. "I know," I whispered, "but we need to do this right. We need the law on our side." I contacted Sarah Bennett, a skilled criminal attorney in Seattle I'd met through a business partner. I sent her all the evidence, the videos, the toxicology report, and a recording from Jack, a private investigator, of my mother's phone call where she referred to Mason's death as a planned accident. Sarah listened, her voice grave over the phone. "Dean, with what you've got, we can pursue charges of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted bodily harm, and possibly homicide related to your son's death. But how do you want to handle this? Confront them directly or go straight to the police?" I paused, thinking of Mason, of my mother's cold gaze and my father's fake smile. "I want to confront them," I said. "I want to hear them admit it. But I need you there, and the police too." Sarah agreed, and we devised a plan. That evening's dinner felt heavy, like a storm about to break. I sat at the head of the table, my crutch propped beside me, trying to maintain a calm facade. My mother brought out a casserole, flashing a sweet smile. "Dean, Elena, I made this especially for you two," she said, her voice so gentle it felt contrived. My father sat across from me, sipping wine, his eyes flickering over me as if assessing. Sarah and Officer Michael arrived right on time. I introduced them as work friends and an acquaintance, but I saw my mother stiffen when she noticed Michael's uniform. "A police officer?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. "Oh, that's unexpected." "Just a friendly dinner, Mom," I said, forcing a strained smile. "Sit down, let's eat." The meal began in awkward silence. Elena and I barely touched our food, citing a health-related diet. I saw my mother glance at our plates, a flash of irritation in her eyes. Sarah chatted cheerfully as if nothing were amiss, but Michael sat quietly, observing everyone with careful precision. Then I decided to break the silence. I turned on the dining room TV, which I'd connected to my laptop. The security footage played. My father in the garage, tampering with the car before the accident. "What did you do to the car that night, Dad? The brakes didn't work. You knew that, didn't you?" My voice rose, unable to contain my anger. My father shot up, his chair crashing to the floor. "Dean, what the hell is going on? Are you accusing your own parents?" he shouted, but his eyes were wild, darting nervously. Sarah spoke, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, we have evidence of a slow-acting poison in Dean and Elena's food. And this video," she pointed to the screen, now showing my mother sprinkling poison from the glass jar, "shows you deliberately poisoning them." My mother burst into tears, covering her face. "Dean, I didn't want to," she sobbed. "Your father made me. He said we needed the money, that you didn't need all that wealth. I just followed along." Her confession hit me like a knife to the heart. I stared at her, the woman who once sang me lullabies, now admitting to harming my family. My father shouted, cutting her off. "You liar! I didn't make you do anything." He bolted for the door, knocking over a chair, but Michael was faster. He chased after my father, calling for backup on his radio. Within minutes, police sirens wailed outside. My father was handcuffed, his face a mix of rage and desperation as he was led to the patrol car. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "Dean, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for Mason to die. It was just an accident." But her words meant nothing anymore. I turned away, unable to look at her. Soon after, Michael and his colleagues handcuffed her and took her away. After discussing with Elena, we decided to press charges against my parents for murder, poisoning, and attempted bodily harm. 3 months later, the case went to trial. The 4-day trial gripped Seattle's media attention. Sarah, representing our family, methodically presented every piece of evidence. Every frame of video, every lab result, every whispered word in the recordings. Finally, the judge, a stern older woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Mason Miller, the jury finds the defendants, Arthur Miller and Carol Miller, guilty. On the charges of conspiracy to commit murder and attempted bodily harm against Dean and Elena Miller, we find the defendants guilty. The gavel struck, cold and final. My mother collapsed, sobbing. My father shouted, "You have no right," before being handcuffed and escorted out by the police. Elena and I held each other tightly, tears falling not from joy but from a simple, brutal truth. Justice had been served, but the pain and loss were too great to ever fully heal. 1 year after the trial, Elena and I visited Mason's grave at the cemetery on the outskirts of Seattle. The autumn wind blew gently, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the quiet stillness of a gray afternoon. The small headstone engraved with our son's name, Mason James Miller, our little angel, sat silently amidst the lush green grass. I knelt down, placing a bouquet of white chrysanthemums on the grave, my fingers brushing lightly over the inscription as if I could feel Mason's warmth through the cold stone. Elena stood beside me, one hand cradling her belly, the other gripping my hand tightly. She was 7 months pregnant with another boy, a new light in our lives. But today, we were here for Mason to tell him we'd never forgotten him. The past year had been a long journey, filled with dark days and moments when I thought I couldn't go on. After the trial, when my parents were sentenced to life in prison, Elena and I left the mansion on Puget Hill. That house, once the place where we built our dreams, was now filled only with painful memories. We moved to a smaller home in a coastal town an hour's drive from Seattle. The new house wasn't as grand as the old one, but it was warm, with large windows overlooking the ocean and a small garden that Elena tended to daily. We wanted a place to start over, to heal, though we knew the wound of losing Mason would always be a part of us. I cut off all contact with my extended family on my parents' side. The relatives who had supported my parents, who called me a traitor during the trial, were now just faded names in my memory. I realized that family isn't about blood. It's about those who love and protect you. Elena, and now our unborn child, were my true family. Elena and I established a charitable foundation in Mason's name, dedicated to supporting families who lost young children to accidents or crimes. We organized workshops to raise awareness about child safety, from choosing safe toys to inspecting living environments. Each time I stood before a group of parents, I shared Mason's story, not to reopen the wound, but to remind them that every child deserves protection. Elena often stood by my side talking about warning signs like the cold look in my mother's eyes or the small details we'd overlooked. "Trust your instincts," she always said, her eyes shining with determination. The foundation wasn't just a way to keep Mason's memory alive. It was a lifeline out of the darkness. There were days when I woke up feeling like I couldn't breathe, thinking of my boy, but every thank you letter from a family we helped, every smile from a protected child gave me a reason to keep going. Today, standing at Mason's grave, Elena wore a loose sweater that concealed her rounded belly. "Do you think this little one will be like Mason?" she asked, her voice soft but full of hope. I looked at her, seeing the light in her eyes, and smiled. "I think so," I said. "He'll be just as wonderful as his big brother, and we'll protect him no matter what." I thought of the name we'd chosen for our unborn child, Liam, a simple name meaning strong protector. We wanted Liam to grow up in a safe world, free from the shadows Mason had endured. I placed my hand on Elena's belly, feeling a gentle kick from Liam, and my heart warmed. "You'll be our new joy, Liam," I whispered, "and we'll tell you about your brother so you know how amazing Mason was." Elena leaned her head on my shoulder, tears streaming down her face, but she smiled. "Mason's watching us, Dean. I know he's smiling." I nodded, my throat tight. I pictured Mason with his eyes bright as a summer sky, somewhere up above, watching over us. And I knew, though the pain would never fade, we would keep living, for him, for Liam, and for ourselves. As we left the cemetery, a rare ray of Seattle sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the path ahead. I held Elena's hand, walking slowly, my crutch now replaced by a small cane. Our lives had changed forever, but I'd learned a bitter lesson: greed can destroy even the most sacred bonds. I resolved to live more simply, focusing on what truly mattered: Elena, Liam, and Mason's memory. We didn't need a lavish mansion or Forbes recognition. We only needed each other and a home filled with love. As our car rolled along the coastal road, Elena played an old lullaby, the one she used to sing to Mason. Her voice was soft, resonating in the quiet space, and I felt a spark of hope creep into my heart. Mason would always be a part of us, and Liam would be our new light, guiding us through the darkness.